2026 will be an interesting year for F1. New regulations and a new team means opportunity for a lot of change, but will that be true for the driver's market? That's what I'm here to talk about today. While many contracts are valid through 2026, the past few seasons have taught us that does not mean anything. I'm going to be sharing with you my predictions for the 2026 F1 grid. Now, most drivers are contracted through 2026, so that suggests much less change than we've had from 2024 to 2025. But I think the influx of rookies leaves a lot more room for movement than the contract suggests. Without further ado, let's get into my predictions. I will be going from my most confident to least confident. I hope you enjoy. I do want to make one note. I do think that because 2026 is the first year of the new regulations, people are going to be more inclined to stay with their team that they have in 2026 than they will be to go somewhere else. And I think the teams will also appreciate the consistency to have a better judge of their 2026 car. I think a much more change will come in 2027 once we know how the teams are stacking up against each other. Just wanted to put that out there. So if you're interested in my 2027 grid predictions, let me know and I will be sure to make that video for you all. Let's get started with Williams. I believe there will be no changes between 2025 and 2026, and they will stay with Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon as they are currently contracted. Now, I believe this to be true for a couple of reasons. I think that 2025 will be a very telling year for how Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon stack up as the quality of drivers. I tend to believe that Carlos Sainz will outperform Alex Albon. How much? Time will only tell. I think that would make it hard for Alex to move anywhere else. He's been where he's been for a while. I think if he outperformed Carlos, obviously that would suggest he should move up. He could go somewhere better, but I just don't necessarily feel like that will be the case. So I think he's in Williams for sort of the long run. When it comes to Carlos, it's like literally the contract he just signed. He signed for 2025 and 2026, knowing 2026 is when we will be able to see things. There's no reason for him to want to leave early, and I don't predict any reason that Williams would want him or Alex out early. I think they're both good, very stable, and predictable drivers that will be helpful in Williams in developing their car in the future. I am very confident on that one. I don't anticipate any change there. Now with Mercedes, this one is interesting because both driver contracts are up in 2025, meaning there is room for change in 2026, but I don't think there will be. I think in 2026, Mercedes will keep Kimi Antonelli and George Russell. It's been the obvious choice since Lewis left, and them putting Kimi in the car to replace Lewis suggests a certain level of confidence, and barring just really bad performance and his inability to get the car going, I don't think he'd be dropped. I think Mercedes is putting their effort besides him, and I don't see who would replace him. For George Russell, I think they would keep him because he is a very good marker. He's a very capable driver. He's been outperforming Lewis Hamilton, not necessarily meaning he is better than Lewis Hamilton. It's all circumstance. I think he'll be a very good measuring stick for Kimi Antonelli, and I think he'd be a good support, especially as we're building the new car. George has been very committed to Mercedes. He started off with a horrendous car and he's stuck by them, and I think he will be able to help develop the 2026 car, and I don't see why he would leave. Though I do think George has to fight to keep his position. If for whatever reason he's just like being way outperformed by Kimi Antonelli, that's an issue and he absolutely will be dropped. I just don't anticipate that happening in the first season. 2027 is a whole different thing. If I was going absolutely crazy, I would say that Oscar Piastri would leave McLaren and go to Mercedes in 2026. That would assume that there is some sort of real teammate rivalry at McLaren, and it's heavily interfering with their ability to win drivers and or the Constructors' Championship in 2025. That to me is a possibility. If McLaren continues to have the same issues they've been having with prioritizing drivers in 2025 that they've had in 2024, I think that will be a real issue. The consideration is when McLaren do something about that, because the driver may want to leave, but that doesn't mean that they can just like forfeit their contract. You know what I'm saying? However, I just don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think 2025 may be a slightly contentious year at McLaren, but I don't think it would be enough for them to void their contracts. That means obviously I'm going with McLaren staying with their lineup in 2026 of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. Again, I think 2027 may be a different story. It's all just going to see how the McLaren continues to do and how Lando and Oscar continue to do. I don't see why Lando would get worse. I think he's on an upward trajectory. I'm unclear on where Oscar is going trajectory-wise. I can't tell if he's hit his peak or if there's room for him to get even better. I think if Oscar improves, he will surely leave in 2026 or 2027, but I'm leaning towards that being in 2027, also mostly because I don't anticipate there to be enough movement at the top teams for them to be anywhere else to go. That mostly comes down to, again, I think George will do just fine, and there'll be no reason for Mercedes to drop George and take on Oscar. On to the next one, which is Ferrari. Now, this one is interesting. I am inclined to put this as my most confident top number one prediction. However, I think it's very dependent completely on Lewis. The rumor is that the contract is up until 2026 with an option for 2027. However, I think if Lewis Hamilton is done, Lewis Hamilton is done. Why he would be done, in my opinion, is if he gets a championship. If he wins 2025, he gets his 8th world championship, I think he might just call it. I think he'll say, that's enough, I've done it, we're good. In that case, that would trigger a change in 2026. The other reason I think would trigger a change in 2026, which I am less confident in, is if for some reason Ferrari just completely bottles it, or Lewis has bottled it and he's lost it. I don't think that would be the case. And even if that were the case, the whole point was the 2026. Everybody is signing for 2025 and 2026, so we can see how everybody is doing in 2026. Now, if Ferrari just doesn't perform in 2026, I think Lewis is done. He's calling it. He won't be here in 2027. But again, I believe if he wins the championship in 2025, which is possible, then he retires. However, I'm not quite sure on the likelihood of that. I think it's entirely possible, but not enough for me to put Ferrari as my most confident choice. So that's why it is there. Obviously, Charles is there for life. I really don't see Charles ever leaving unless something horrific happens to Ferrari and there's room for him somewhere else. I really do hope that my prediction here is wrong. I would love Lewis to win in 2025. I don't want him to retire in 2026, but I want him to win in 2025, which I believe could trigger a retirement. So we'll just have to see. My next prediction is for Audi. This will be the first year that Audi will be full owners of that Sauber team. I believe they will keep the same drivers that they have of Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto. I believe they were signed, they're contracted through for 2026, and that seemed to me like an Audi decision. That's not a Sauber decision. So keep the car, maybe they'll have some part of development in 2025 and it only makes sense for them to stay in 2026. The only concern I have is Gabriel Bortoleto not performing, and for whatever reason they want there to be a change. If that were to happen, I believe that they would put in Théo Pourchaire. I'm kind of biased towards Théo Pourchaire. I really appreciated how he came over to Indy and he was very enthusiastic about IndyCar. I wish he got a seat, and so I just want him to have a seat somewhere. And I think it would be nice if he got to go to Audi. He is part of the Sauber Academy, but I just don't think that Gabriel Bortoleto is going to underperform so much that they'd want to have a change. So far, literally no changes, which is kind of boring, which is why I've been throwing you the bone of who I think could change it up. But for Haas, I am keeping the same. I think it will be Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon. They both are signed through 2026, so there's no real reason for that to change. What I do think could cause a change is if Lewis Hamilton retires. If that were to happen, I very firmly believe that Ollie Behrman would go up to Ferrari. Again, unless he's really underperforming, which I just don't anticipate. He's proven himself. He's there and he's at Haas until he moves up to Ferrari, and I think that is fully dependent on Lewis. So whenever Lewis retires, that's when Ollie's going up. Red Bull. This is where I start to get not very confident. I'm keeping the Red Bull the same with Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson in 2026. Only again because I'm not sure who would replace them. Now, Max Verstappen is contracted through 2028. If he stays that long, I'm not so sure. I just don't think 2026 will be the year for the change. I think that would be the year that would trigger the change and our possible retirement. He could just call it at that point. He seems to be interested in doing other series while he's still at his top. So if Red Bull just does not perform with the 2026 regs, I see him leaving either the series as a whole or going somewhere else. Where? Maybe Mercedes. There's been that going on. That would be crazy. But I just don't think 2026 is early enough. I think you have to ride it out and see what the new regs are. Now with Liam Lawson, I'm less convinced about Liam Lawson. I think there's room for him to get pushed back down into the VCARB if he doesn't perform very well and Isaac Hydra performs very well. I just don't, for some reason, I'm not seeing that. Red Bull's in an interesting phase. They're going to have to really rebuild. I think Max Verstappen has been a huge blocker for him. Max Verstappen and the car, because when you have such a quick car, like as it's been shown by many teammates, it's just, you can't compete with that. And their resistance to moving up any of their junior drivers for a while, I think has caused a bit of an issue. And now they don't have a ton of junior drivers. And I still think they're going to be cautious of who they push up. And so for that reason, I think as long as Liam Lawson is decent, he will stay in that seat through 2026. Again, and I also think Hadjar could have the possibility of moving up. I'm just not sure I see Liam Lawson being pushed back down. Like, I just don't see Liam Lawson going back to the VCARB or whatever it's going to be called. I think that would leave a hole in their system that they wouldn't be able to fill. And so that's why I'm staying with Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen in 2026. Now we get onto our first change of Aston Martin. So Alonso and Lance Stroll are contracted through 2026, but I believe that it's Lance's time. I think Lance will be leaving. I think he'll be leaving after 2025 and joining the WEC project. And who will be coming in? Yuki Tsunoda. Red Bull's refusal to ever promote Yuki Tsunoda, I think, is very telling of how they view him. To me, it seems that he is a Honda driver, not a Red Bull driver. For that reason, Honda is joining Aston Martin in 2026. I think it makes sense. Now, my holdup is that Lance is contracted through 2026, and I believe that contract was signed after the Honda contract was signed. So if they wanted Yuki, they probably would have pushed harder for Yuki, but I just kind of think Lance is almost like, I'm Canadian. I have to appreciate Lance Stroll, and I do. It's just like, and I don't see Alonso. I think Alonso will be there for 2026. He wants to try out those regs, and then he might leave. So maybe that's the holdup. Maybe like Yuki Tsunoda loses his seat for 2026, and he takes whatever spot is emptied out in 2027 at Aston Martin. But I think it's going to come earlier. I think it will be 2026. On to Alpine. I'm so mixed on Alpine. I want them to keep Pierre and Jack Doohan through 2026. Though Pierre is signed through 2026, Doohan is only signed for 2025. I'm just not sure that's going to happen. I really want Jack Doohan to get in there and perform super well and really prove himself. I'm just not sure Alpine is setting him up for success. There's been a lot of rumors surrounding his position at Alpine. He was signed before Flavio Briatore has been brought back in, and the rumor is Briatore wants him out for whatever reason. That might have been why they gave Jack Doohan the seat in Abu Dhabi and they kicked out Esteban early, trying to test him out, and they want Franco Colapinto in. Again, I don't want this to happen, but I fear it might, and so I'm predicting that 2026 is Pierre Gasly and, for lack of a better pick, Franco Colapinto. That decision isn't based on betting on Franco Colapinto. I'm just more so betting on Alpine to kind of screw over Jack Doohan. The other person it could be is Victor Martins, but I think him not being pushed up now and them going for Doohan instead kind of tells me they aren't interested in Victor Martins. I don't know. Again, like, this is not what I want. This is not a prediction I'm happy to make, but the vibes around Alpine are not good right now, and I think he's gonna be pushed out, Jack Doohan. Ugh. Okay, I'm editing the episode, and I just want to add that as I was filming that, I got a notification about Franco Colapinto signing to Alpine. So I did not know until I finished filming that video, but like, what can I say? I was right, and it's allegedly a 5-year deal that Alpine spent a lot of money to get Williams out of the contract, so obviously they're going to intend to use him. Therefore, yeah, setting Jack Doohan up for failure. Whatever. On to VCARB or whatever it's going to be called. Apparently that's changing. I hate their name. They need to actually pick something decent. I believe that Hajar will stay on through 2026. He is only contracted for 2025, but I think he will stay. I think he will perform decently enough that they will keep him, but again, I'm not sure that they'd want to swap Liam Lawson and him. And as I already predicted, I believe Yuki Tsunoda will move and go to the Aston Martin. I actually had a very hard time thinking about who would replace Yuki Tsunoda there. I'm not super familiar with all of their junior drivers right now. They've dropped a ton, and I've since fallen off of watching F2. But even still, their current rookies in F2 haven't been performing that well. They are moving some up into F2 for the 2025 season. We'll have to see how they do. So I've had to do research on this. This is not necessarily my prediction. Again, this is just more based on Yuki leaving and then them promoting their own junior, because again, there has been the rumor of George Russell maybe going to Red Bull once his contract is up in 2026. Well, that's what Christian Horner was saying anyways. And then Helmut Marko was saying, no, we're focusing on our juniors. So I've picked someone from their junior academy. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I'm going with Arvin Lindblad. He is going to be in F2 next year. People are rating him highly, and they seem to be trying to make sure he has his enough super license points. So I can see how Red Bull is pushing him. So I'm going with that. People are very convinced on him. So I'm obviously not super confident in that prediction because again, I don't really know this guy. But I just think Yuki will leave. On to the last and my most unconfident prediction, and perhaps the most interesting because it is completely wide open: Cadillac. So Cadillac is a completely new team coming in. There are like literally the possibilities of who it could be are infinite. I'm going to address a few of them before I get to who I think it will be. There's also a ton of factors that come into it. People believe that because it's Cadillac and it's American that they would want American drivers, and I get that. I do understand where that is coming from. The problem with American drivers is the super license issue. The FIA doesn't like to give super license points to drivers in American feeder series, and there aren't a ton of Americans in FIA feeder series, so this is a problem. I also am not inclined to believe that the FIA will waive that, considering we've tried with Colton Herta and that didn't work out, so I think that is going to be a major blocker. If we're going from who is technically available on the grid with Yuki Tsunoda, Jack Doohan, Hajar Lawson, I don't think it would be any of them. I think Cadillac will want to go with somebody newer and then also somebody more established in F1, and none of those feel established enough in F1 for me except for Yuki. But again, I think he's going to Aston Martin. I don't know why he would go to Cadillac. And I also do think they will all be elsewhere. And if it doesn't work out for Jack Doohan, I just don't anticipate it working out for him anywhere else. Sadly, I mean, he could become a reserve driver or development driver somewhere, and that could open a door at Cadillac, but I just don't see that happening. The other problem with Cadillac is that they can't boost their super license points with FP1 sessions, which a lot of teams do, but because Cadillac won't even have a car in 2025, there's just no FP1 session for them to put their drivers in. So let's move on to some of the American drivers it could be. Within the FIA system, there is Jack Crawford. I just don't think he has been performing amazingly well. I just don't think that's a fit. He is American, but that's kind of the only reason his name is being brought up. And so with that, let's discuss the Indy drivers I think it could be. I selfishly don't want to lose any of the Indy drivers because I love them and I want them to stay here and win championships and Indy 500s here. The perhaps loudest in the public is Colton Herta. I don't necessarily see this happening. There is the Andretti connection, even though that's kind of weird. Now Colton Herta is driving for Andretti in IndyCar, but it's not the Andretti Cadillac team anymore because the FIA and F1 is weird about that. So that connection would make sense, but the issue would be, does he have enough super license points? I think as is, he would need one super license point, which he could very well get, depending how he does in the IndyCar Championship in 2025. That is a solid maybe. I think it's a real option. It's not what I'm predicting. Pato O'Ward. I don't see this happening. People call out this name a lot. I think it's because it's one of the few names that they know from IndyCar, but he is contracted with McLaren through 2027, I believe. And so if there's ever a move to F1 for him, I think it's going to be through McLaren, which, do you know what? I didn't even think of that. I think that very well could happen if McLaren is having issues with Lando and Oscar that could put Pato in. But I don't think that's going to happen, and I also don't think McLaren would give him up to work for Cadillac. No, I just don't see that happening at all. I'm taking that off. And who does that leave but Alex Palou? I do think Alex Palou will be in the Cadillac in 2026 for a few reasons. Even though he is not American, he is racing in an American series. So he has, he's American enough in that sense. And he also is a very good driver, and he's good on the road and street courses in IndyCar. His one issue in IndyCar actually is ovals. So for that reason, I understand why he would want to move over and why Cadillac would have trust in his ability to move over. I also think him being European is a benefit. I can't tell how people are feeling about an American team in F1, because even Haas is American, but they're not very loud about it, right? And their factory is not based in America. So I think by Alex Palou being Spanish, being European, there's enough of a mix of the American and Europeanness within him that I think he is like a great choice. I also think him being Spanish specifically will be helpful considering the new Madrid Grand Prix that will be in 2026. To me, it just feels like the most obvious fit, and apparently he does have a clause in his contract with Chip Ganassi that he can leave if there is a F1 seat. I'm feeling actually pretty confident about that. If it's not Colton Herta, which I don't think it will be, it's Alex Palou. Like, I'm putting that 95%. Now I think we're going to need a established F1 driver. I think Cadillac is going to be resistant to rookies, complete rookies, because crashing is more likely if you're a rookie, and crashing is expensive, which is also why I believe there's trust in Alex Palou, because although he will be new to F1, he's not new to racing. He's a very reliable driver, and although it's different cars, he has tested with McLaren before. It just makes sense to me. And so I think they're going to now look for somebody who is in F1 and is trusted. That could be George Russell, but again, I do believe he will be staying at Mercedes. But if for whatever reason that doesn't work out, I do really believe that he could end up at Cadillac. There's also room for Kevin Magnussen. He's a pretty reliable driver. I'm just not sure if he'll be interested. I mean, once you have a year off and you already have kids, that happened with Nico Hülkenberg and he came back. But, I'm not sure. He's already left and come back before. I don't know. And so for me, that leaves Valtteri Bottas. I do believe that it will be an Alex Palou, Valtteri Bottas Cadillac lineup in 2026. The reason I believe it would be Valtteri Bottas is because of his choice to stay on as a Mercedes reserve driver. Now, that is a bit of a problem because there will be Ferrari engines for Cadillac at the start, and so that's a clash. Although, he does have experience with the Ferrari engines at Sauber. I just think Valtteri Bottas is pretty reliable, and I think his decision to stay as a reserve driver for Mercedes indicates that he's not quite done yet. I'm less confident in Bottas as I am in Alex Palou. I do really think that if anything happens at Mercedes, it will be George Russell in the Cadillac 100%. I'm just not necessarily betting on that happening. And so that's my last, because although I'm pretty confident in it, I'm more confident in Alex Palou than I am the Valtteri Bottas of it. It's just two drivers that are completely new. Like, literally anybody could go there, so I'm the least confident in that sense. So those are my predictions for the 2026 F1 grid. Let me know what you think of my predictions. What are your predictions? Do you think I'm just completely whack? I think I tried to keep pretty sane with it. I needed, to keep a balance of the saneness with anything could happen. And again, if you are interested in my 2027 predictions, because I think that is much more open and much more interesting to talk about, especially being so far away. That's you're kind of just saying words. You can't predict that. We're just making things up. But I do think that's kind of fun. So let me know if you would like to see that. Please follow, subscribe, thumbs up, comment, 5 stars, review, all of those things. I would really appreciate it. And I will catch you next week.